locomotor disability, visual impairment, hearing impairment, deaf and hard of hearing, speech and language disability, intellectual disability, mental illness, disability caused due to chronic neurological conditions, disability caused due to blood disorder, and multiple disabilities. So the right to person with disabilities, rules 2018, within this rule, any person with a specific disability may apply in form 4. So this is the form 4. The application is submitted to the medical authority in the district of residence of the applicant, or it may also be submitted to the medical authority of the government hospital where he or she had undergone the treatment for the disability. If a person is a minor or unable to apply for himself or herself, the legal guardian can do the same. And the application should be accompanied by proof of residence, 2 recent passport size photographs, and an Aadhaar card or an Aadhaar enrollment number also. So the rule 18 under this rule, which is for the issue of certificate of disability, that says that the medical authority shall issue the certificate or mention the reason for rejection within a month of the receipt of the application. The medical authority, after due examination, can issue a permanent or a temporary certificate. In permanent certificate, there is no chance of variation of disability with time, in contrary to the temporary certificate, indicating a period of validity if there is a chance of variation with time. So under these rules, there are 2 broad headings, intellectual disability and mental illness. In the intellectual disability, that includes the intellectual disability, specific learning disability, and autism spectrum disorders. So first of all, we come to the intellectual disability. It is a condition characterized by significant limitation in both intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior, which covers a range of everyday social and practical skills. So the screening is done, screening many of these children are followed up by pediatrician. So they can be screened by them for associated comorbidities. And then they are referred for a detailed assessment to a child or clinical psychologist. Diagnosis is done by clinical or child psychologists. Adaptive functioning, we apply the Vineland Social Maturity Scale, and for IQ testing, BKT or Binet-Kamat test, MI-SIC, Mellon Intelligence Scale for Indian children is used. Based on the above, intellectual disability is diagnosed, and based on the adaptive functioning, intellectual disability severity scoring is done. So this is the disability calculation, which is based on VSMS score. When it is 0 to 20, it is profound, percentage is 100%, 21 to 35 severe, 90%, 36 to 54 moderate, 75%, 55 to 69 mild, 50%, and 70 to 84 borderline, 25%. The age of certificate. The minimum age of certification is 1 year. 1 to 5 years is known as global developmental delay, and greater than 5 years is known as intellectual disability. The medical authority, which constituted by the head, which is the medical superintendent, the chief medical officer, a civil surgeon, or any other equivalent authority. Then a pediatrician, a pediatric neurologist, psychiatrist, or physician if under greater than 18 years of age, clinical or rehabilitation psychologist, and a psychiatrist. The validity of certificate. Temporary if less than 5 years, valid for a maximum of 3 years or 5 years, whichever is earlier. For greater than 5 years, a renewal age is mentioned, which have to be renewed at 5, 10, and 18 years. For greater than 18 years, it has lifelong validity. Now we come to the specific learning disability. It's a heterogeneous group of conditions wherein there is a deficit in processing language, spoken or written, that may manifest as a difficulty to comprehend speech, read, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations. It includes dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and developmental aphasia. So the screening is done by the school teachers, class 3rd or 8 years, whichever is earlier. If screening is positive, child should be referred for further assessment. Every school should have a screening committee consisting of the head, that is the principal. The teacher with screens informs to the committee, which have an interview with the parents, and the child is referred for further assessment to the pediatrician. For the diagnosis, a team approach is made by a pediatrician and rehabilitation or a clinical psychologist. There are 3 steps: assessment by pediatrician for visual and hearing assessment, assessment by child and clinical psychologist, IQ assessment using the Mellon Intelligence Scale for Indian children or Bachelor's Intelligence Scale for children 3. If IQ is greater than 85, proceed to step 3. For a specific learning disability assessment, the application of specific psychometric tests for diagnosing SLD and giving a severity scale. Now I've left this blank, I'll fill it in 2 minutes as we go further. Now the medical authority. The medical authority consists of the head, who is the medical superintendent of the hospital, or the chief medical officer, or the civil surgeon, or any other equivalent authority. Pediatrician, now I've left this blank, I'll fill it up in 2 minutes. Pediatric neurologist, wherever applicable. Clinical or rehabilitation psychologist, an occupation therapist, or a special educator, or a trained teacher for assessment of specific learning disability. Now, the Government of India on 9th of December 2020 that made some changes in this rules. They said that after the word pediatrician, the word psychiatrist shall be inserted, because in the whole of the rules, there was no mention of psychiatrist. So the Government of India added the psychiatrist, and they also included the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurological Neurosciences, NIMHANS battery should be applied for the diagnostic test of the specific learning disability. So now we have the word psychiatrist here because now they also have an important, before that there was no mention of psychiatrist being made. And for the diagnosis for SLD, we use the NIMHANS battery. Then the validity of the certificate is, now the validity is done for 8 years or above. Now the recertification at 14 years and then again at 18 years. For 18 years and above, they stand lifelong validity. Mental illness definition: a substantial disorder of thinking, mood, perception, orientation, or memory that grossly impairs judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to meet the ordinary demands of life, but does not include retardation, which is a condition of arrested or incomplete development of mind or of a person, especially characterized by subnormality of intelligence. The assessment is done by IDEAS, the Indian Disability Evaluation and Assessment Scale, and or IQ assessment. We come to the IDEAS, which is used for the assessment of disability related to mental illness. So the items are the self-care, interpersonal activities, communication and understanding, and work, which forms a total disability score plus duration of illness equals to the global disability score. In self-care, includes taking care of the body hygiene, grooming, health, including bathing, toileting and dressing, eating and taking care of one's health, and is guided by the social norms and conventions. Interpersonal activities: social relationships, initiating and maintaining interaction with others in a socially appropriate manner, includes patient response to questions, requests and demands of others, regulating emotions, initiating, maintaining and terminating interactions, and activities of engaging in physical intimacy. Communication and understanding spoken messages as well as written and non-verbal messages, ability to deduce messages in order to communicate with others. Work: this includes employment, housework and educational performance. Score only one category in case of an overlap. So the scores for each item, they are from no to profound. No is 0 score, mild 1, moderate 2, severe 3, and profound 4. After that, duration of illness, less than 2 years is 1, 2 to 5 years is 2, 6 to 10 years 3, and greater than 10 years is 4. Now, based on that, we calculate the global disability percentage. Now, 0 is, there's no disability, percentage is 0. 1 to 6 is mild, less than 40%. 7 to 13 is moderate, 40 to 70%. 14 to 19 is severe, 71 to 99%, and 20 is profound, 100%. Now, if there is suspicion of intellectual deficits, a standardized IQ test may be carried out. 50 to 69% is mild, 35 to 49 moderate, 20 to 34 severe, and less than 20 is profound. In case where the condition requires only IDEAS, then only IDEAS can be administered and degree of disability certified. In case where the condition requires only IQ, when a standardized IQ test shall be used to certify the degree of disability. And in cases of both, the score indicating more severe disability should be the degree of disability for that person. Medical authority, it consists of the head, again, the medical superintendent or the CMO or the civil surgeon or any other equivalent authority, the psychiatrist for clinical assessment, and a trained psychologist to administer the IQ test. The validity certificate is valid for 5 years by default, valid for a specific time period as mentioned by the psychiatrist. It is a permanent certificate if mentioned so in the certificate. So by default, all the certificates are valid for 5 years until unless mentioned by a psychiatrist for a specified period of time. Now we come to the critical appraisal of the RPWD rules. So the positive aspects are that it's a very structured guidelines for diagnosis, screening, and severity rating is mentioned. The critique is that in spite of a huge effort for laying down the process for certification, it has increased the paperwork and time taken, causing undue distress to the service users. And also in the whole of it, there's no mention about the certification of autism in the entire rules. So this is one of the flaws of the rules. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. The House is open for discussion.
I have a question, Priya. Who can apply ideas? Can you tell that, please?
So the ideas can be applied by the a trained by a psychiatrist. It can be applied by a psychiatrist.
It can be applied by a psychiatrist, a clinical psychologist, rehabilitation psychologist.
Yes, ma'am.
No,
yes,
not only by psychiatrists, but it can be applied by psychologist, rehabilitation psychologist, clinical psychologist.
Clinical psychologist, yes, ma'am.
Right?
Yes, ma'am.
Or child psychologist.
Yes, ma'am.
So what would be the role of the CMO then? Well, are they, is it binding on them to take the assessment of psychiatrist, psychologist, rehabilitation psychologist, or is it just a guiding mark for them?
So the CMO is the head of the medical authority. When a psychiatrist or a clinical or a rehabilitation psychologist, they write that a disability is valid. They actually certify the already written document by the psychiatrist.
So basically what happens, there is a panel in every, medical college or hospital where the CMO, psychologist, psychiatrist, and they have a number of people in their panel. So what happens once the assessment is being done, the reports are given to the CMO, they verify it, and after that they approve the certification.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Priya, I have a question. What do you mean by benchmark disability?
So benchmark disabilities, according to the definition, it has 40%. So above the 40% disabilities, they are called as benchmark disabilities. So any disability percentage above 40%.
And when do you repeat this evaluation? Though you have shared this, I want you to repeat this. When you repeat this disability evaluation.
Yes, sir. So by default, if it is not written in the certificate, all the certificates are valid for 5 years. But if a psychiatrist specifically writes that it's valid for 6 months or even 1 year, it will be valid for that time period. Or if the psychiatrist mentioned that it is valid for lifetime, then also it will be valid for lifetime. But we have to specify it in the certificate. Otherwise, it will be valid for 5 years.
So if we are not sure, or if basically, I think it will be safer if we write it that it is valid for 1 year, because at times now there is a disability, we have been forced to actually write it because of this benefit schemes and all. I think it is better that if the patient is not with us for a very long period of time, we do it for an year,
Yes.
and maybe the next time we can, write for 5 years, or we don't write anything. It will be taken by proxy that it will be for 5 years.
Yes.
Any other scale than ideas which we can use for disability evaluation?
Sir,
Okay.
yes.
There are some more scales which can
Yes.
be used, but most commonly used as ideas. In mental retardation, there is ADP-MR,
Yes.
which is standardized in Indian population,
Yes.
assessment of disability and disability evaluation in mental retardation.
Yes.
So ADP-MR. So I think that can specifically in mental retardation.
Yes.
So that has been standardized. I think the standardization was done in CIP, and
Yes.
it is the government of India also in few places have recommended its use. So that can be also looked into.
Yes.
So I think we can
Thank you, sir.
quickly move to the next presentation, because we have 4 presentations today.
Yes.
So we can wind up this presentation.
Yes, yes.
Yes, so Priya, it's very good presentation, and
Thank you,
I
ma'am.
guess we have enough information regarding intellectual disability and certification. So we'll wind up this session and we'll proceed to next one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
The next presentation will be on defense mechanisms by Dr. Siddhant.
And who's the moderator?
Sir Srinivasan, sir.
Okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My topic for today is defense mechanisms. These are the mechanisms that mediate the individual's reaction to emotional conflicts and to external stressors. Defense mechanisms are automatic psychological processes that protect the individual against anxiety and from the awareness of internal or external dangers or stressors. Individuals are often unaware of these processes as they operate. Defense mechanisms mediate the individual's reaction to emotional conflicts and to internal and external stressors.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is no PPT display right now. Am I the only one who's not seeing it, or?
Ma'am, there is some.
No, yeah, the right PPT is not there. So you need to share the PPT.
This one. Yeah.
Yes.
Ma'am, can you see it right now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll start again. Defense mechanisms are mechanisms that mediate the individual's reaction to emotional conflicts and to external stressors. These are automatic psychological processes that protect the individual against anxiety and from the awareness of internal or external dangers or stressors. Individuals are often unaware of these processes as they operate. Defense mechanisms mediate the individual's reaction to emotional conflicts and to internal and external stressors. Now, psychoanalytic theory by Sigmund Freud. According to this theory, a defense mechanism is an unconscious psychological mechanism that reduces anxiety arising from unacceptable or potentially harmful stimuli. Sigmund Freud was one of the first proponents of this construct. Defense mechanisms may result in healthy or unhealthy consequences depending on the circumstances and frequency with which the mechanism is used. In psychoanalytic theory, defense mechanisms are psychological strategies brought into play by the unconscious mind to manipulate, deny, or distort reality in order to defend against the feelings of anxiety and unacceptable impulses and to maintain one's self-schema. Healthy person normally use different defenses throughout life, and ego defense mechanisms becomes pathological only when its persistent use leads to maladaptive behavior such that the physical or mental health of the individual is adversely affected. Now, there are 4 types of defense mechanisms, which is psychotic, immature, neurotic, and mature. We'll start off with the psychotic defenses. These defenses are usually found as a part of a psychotic process, but may also occur in young children and adult dreams or fantasies. They share the common note of avoiding, negating, or distorting reality. The first one is projection. Projection is attributing one's own maladaptive inner impulses to someone else. For example, someone who commits an episode of infidelity in their marriage may then accuse their partner of infidelity or may become more suspicious of their partner. The second one is denial. It is a psychotic denial of external reality, which affects perception of the reality more than perception of internal reality. It is seeing but refusing to acknowledge what one sees or hearing and negating what is actually heard. Denial avoids becoming aware of some painful aspect of reality. At the psychotic level, the denied reality may be replaced by a fantasy or a delusion. For example, a person may refuse to believe the reality of the death of a loved one by denying that the event ever happened. The next one is distortion. It is grossly reshaping the experience of external realities to suit inner needs, including unrealistic megalomaniac beliefs, hallucinations, wish-fulfilling delusions, and employing sustained feelings of delusional grandiosity, superiority, or entitlement. For example, a person may believe that they failed a test because of difficult questions, not because that they did not study well. Now, moving on to immature defenses. These are mechanisms which are fairly common in pre-adolescent years and in adult character disorders. They are often mobilized by anxieties related to intimacy or its loss. Although they are regarded as socially awkward and undesirable, they often moderate with improvement in interpersonal relationships or with increased personal maturity. The first one is acting out. It is the direct expression of an unconscious wish or impulse to avoid being conscious of the accompanying effect. Acting out involves giving into impulses to avoid the tension that would result from postponement of their expression. For example, instead of saying, "I'm angry with you," a person who acts out may instead throw a book at the person or punch a hole through the wall. The second one is blocking. It is a temporary or transient block in thinking or the inability to remember. For example, in the middle of a conversation, a woman pauses, looks confused, and asks, "What was I just talking about?" The third one is hypochondriasis. It is the transformation of reproach towards others arising from bereavement, loneliness, or unacceptable, aggressive impulses into self-reproach in the form of somatic complaints of pain, illness, and so forth. Real illness may also be overemphasized or exaggerated for its evasive and regressive possibilities. For example, a patient who is showing hypochondriasis may be convinced that something as simple as a sneeze is the sign that they have a horrible disease. The next one is introjection. It is the introjection of a loved object involves the internalization of characteristics of the object with the goal of ensuring closeness to and constant presence of the object. For example, a little boy tells his younger sister to let him hold her hand as his mother used to do it with her while crossing the road. So passive aggression, it is aggression towards an object expressed indirectly and ineffectively through passivity, masochism, and turning against the self. For example, a man is upset with his wife over something she said earlier, and instead of addressing the issue, he blasts music on the speakers to make it harder for her to study. Next one is regression. Regression is adapting one's behavior to earlier levels of psychosocial development. For example, a stressful event may cause an individual to regress to bedwetting after they have already outgrown this behavior. Next one is schizoid fantasy. It is the tendency to use fantasy and to indulge in an autistic retreat for the purpose of conflict resolution and gratification. For example, daydreaming during a conversation to avoid intimacy. Then somatization, it is a defensive conversion of psychic derivatives into bodily symptoms and the tendency to react with somatic rather than psychic manifestations. For example, a person who has just lost a loved one may somaticize their grief through severe fatigue. Next are neurotic defenses. These are common in apparently normal and healthy individuals as well as in neurotic disorders. They function usually in the alleviation of distressing effects and may be expressed in neurotic forms of behavior. First one is controlling. It is the excessive attempt to manage or regulate events or objects in the environment in the interest of minimizing anxiety and solving internal conflicts. Then displacement. It involves a purposeful, unconscious shifting of impulses or effective investment from one object to another in the interest of solving a conflict. Although the object is changed, the instinctual nature of the impulse and its aim remain unchanged. For example, a person who feels that the boss has been unfair and may also fear being fired if they complain or express anger, and as a result, they may later shout at a family member. Then dissociation, a temporary but drastic modification of character or sense of personal identity to avoid emotional distress. For example, a woman finds herself engaging in bulimic eating behaviors in a subconscious attempt to escape feelings of shame and self-loathing. Then is externalization. It refers to the tendency to perceive in the external world and in external objects components of one's own personality, including instinctual impulses, conflicts, moods, attitudes, and styles of thinking. For example, a patient who is overly argumentative might instead perceive others as argumentative and themselves as blameless. Then inhibition, it is the unconsciously determined limitation or renunciation of specific ego functions to avoid anxiety arising out of conflict with instinctual impulses, superego, or environmental forces or figures. An example of this would be becoming a high school basketball coach rather than a professional athlete, just because he was scared if he would be able to do it or not. Then intellectualization, it is the development of patterns of excessive thinking or over-analyzing, which may increase the distance from one's own emotions. For example, someone diagnosed with a terminal illness does not show emotion after the diagnosis is given, but instead starts to research every source they can find about the illness. Then isolation, it is avoiding the experience of an emotion associated with a person, idea, or situation. This defense mechanism may be present in someone who describes the day their house burned down in a factual way without displaying any emotion. Then rationalization, it is the justification of one's behavior through attempts at a rational explanation. It is present in someone who steals money but feels justified in doing so because they needed the money more than the person from whom they stole. Next is altruism. The next is reaction formation. This is replacing one's initial. The next is reaction formation. It is replacing one's initial impulse toward a situation or idea with the opposite impulse. It may be present in someone who teases or insults a romantic interest whom they like. Conversely, reaction formation may be present in someone who is overly kind to someone whom they dislike. For example, a jealous boy who hates his older brother may show intense respect and admiration for him. Then repression, it is subconsciously blocking ideas or impulses that are undesirable. It may be present in someone who has no recollection of a traumatic event, even though they were conscious and aware during the event. Then sexualization, it is associating sexual aspects to one's experience of certain people, places, objects, or ideas. It can also refer to the development of specific fetishes or sexual references to conventionally non-sexual entities. Now we move on to mature defenses. They are socially adaptive and useful in the integration of personal needs and motives, social demands, and interpersonal relationships. They can underlie seemingly admirable and virtuous patterns of behavior. The first one is altruism. It is the vicarious but constructive and instinctually gratifying service to others, even to the detriment of the self. Then anticipation. The realistic anticipation or planning for future inner discomfort. It implies overly concerned planning, worrying, and anticipation of dire and dreadful possible outcomes. Then humor. It is decreasing or combating the negative emotions associated with the situation by using comedy. For example, telling a funny story about someone during a eulogy. The next one is sublimation. This transforming one's anxiety or emotions into pursuits considered by societal or cultural norms to be more useful. It may be present in someone who channels their aggression and energy into playing sports. Then asceticism. It is the elimination of directly pleasurable effects attributable to an experience. It is directed against all base pleasures, and gratification is derived from renunciation. Then the last one is suppression. It is consciously choosing to block ideas or impulses that are undesirable. This defense mechanism may be present in someone who has intrusive thoughts about a traumatic event but pushes these thoughts out of the mind. Now we're going to discuss about defense mechanisms in specific disorders. First is defense mechanism in schizophrenia. According to Freud, there is regression to the...
Actually, you have only 10 minutes for your presentation. Exceeding time limit. So please brief it up.
Okay, sir. Okay, in schizophrenia, the major defense mechanisms used are denial, projection, and reaction formation. There's a loss of touch with reality and the loss of ego boundaries. In addiction disorders, defense mechanisms are displayed by patients to resist change, ignore situations, and rationalize irrational behaviors. Like a person with substance use disorder may believe that they are truthful through blocking unwanted events from their mind, so they don't have to deal with the social impact, with their emotional impact. And they rationalize their own behavior to protect oneself against criticism and maintain self-respect. And they also use projection in which they blame the issue, such as a substance use disorder, on someone else other than the self. Then in depression, the major defense mechanism used is identification, through which individual strives to become like the lost object in an attempt to undo the loss, and attributes of object representation become a part of self-representation. In mania, the patients use defense mechanisms such as omnipotence, idealization, devaluation, and denial. Then the last one is phobia. In phobia, the defense mechanisms use that displacement and repression. Now, in management of defense mechanism, now studies have shown that defense functioning can improve through brief and longer psychotherapy, especially among therapists who directly address the origin of the individual's defense mechanisms. Furthermore, directly addressing the origin and purpose behind someone's maladaptive defense mechanisms can be used to establish a stronger therapeutic alliance without treatment. Now, one of the most important psychotherapies used is cognitive behavioral therapy. It is used for treatment of depression, anxiety disorder, panic disorder, phobias, eating disorders, anticipatory anxiety, and also for teaching problem-solving methods. Some centers use CBT for management of psychotic symptoms, such as delusions and hallucinations. Thank you.
Can we go to the next presentation? Parkinson's disease by Dr. Vatsala, moderated by Dr. Mumtaz.
Good morning, doctors. I am Vatsala Raturi, and my topic for today is Parkinson's disease, and it was moderated by Dr. Mumtaz. So Parkinson's disease is the second most common age-related neurodegenerative disease, which is exceeded only by Alzheimer's disease. Its cardinal clinical features were first described as the shaking palsy by English physician James Parkinson in 1817. Epidemiology. It is estimated that the number of people with Parkinson in the most populous nations worldwide was nearly 4 million persons in 2005. Number is expected to be more than double to nearly 9 million by the year 2030, based on the aging of the population. The mean age of onset for Parkinson is 60 years. Lifetime risk is nearly 2% for men and 1.3% for women. The frequency of Parkinson increases with aging, but cases can be seen in individuals in their 20s and even younger, particularly in association with a gene mutation. Now, when we talk about the cardinal features, these are the main cardinal features that we can see in a Parkinson patient. They are rest tremor, rigidity, which is also stiffness, bradykinesia, that is slowing of the movement, and then gait dysfunction. There are also additional clinical features that can be observed in the patient, which will be freezing of gait, speech difficulty, swallowing impairment, autonomic disturbances, series of non-motor features, which can be sensory alterations, mood disorders, sleep dysfunction, cognitive impairment, and dementia. Now, when we talk about pathological features, there will be degeneration of dopaminergic neurons. It will be neurons in the substantia nigra pars compacta, reduced striatal dopamine, and intraneuronal proteinaceous inclusion known as Lewy bodies and Lewy neurites, which contain the protein alpha-synuclein. For the non-dopaminergic pathology, it will be described as the cholinergic neurons of the nucleus basalis of Maynard, NBM, which is the collection of large cholinergic neurons in basal forebrain, mainly in substantia innominata. Next will be norepinephrine neurons of the locus coeruleus, which is the principal site for brain synthesis of norepinephrine. serotonin neurons in the raphe nuclei of the brainstem, also neurons of olfactory system, cerebral hemispheres, spinal cord, and principal autonomic nervous system. Now here's a table that shows the clinical features of Parkinson divided further. The main cardinal features that we have already talked about. The other motor features will be which will be micrographia, masked faces, reduced eye blinking, drooling, soft voice, hypophonia, dysphagia, and freezing. As we have talked about non-motor features as well, which will include anosmia, sensory disturbances, mood disorders, sleep disturbances, autonomic disturbances, and cognitive impairment or dementia. Now we talk about types of Parkinson. So mainly it is atypical and secondary Parkinsonism. Starting with atypical Parkinsonism, it refers to a group of neurodegenerative conditions that usually are associated with more widespread pathology than found in Parkinson, potentially with degeneration of striatum, globus pallidus, cerebellum, and brainstem, as well as the substantia nigra pars compacta. Now, when we talk about the clinical features in atypical Parkinson, there will be early involvement of speech and gait, absence of rest tremor, lack of motor asymmetry, poor or no response to levodopa, and in the early stages, they may show a modest benefit from levodopa and can be difficult to distinguish from Parkinson, but the diagnosis becomes clearer with disease evolution. The pathological features will be neurodegeneration, involves the substantia nigra compacta, typically without Lewy bodies, and has more extensive neurodegeneration than occurs in Parkinson. Neuroimaging of the dopamine system is usually not helpful, as striatal dopamine depletion can be seen in both Parkinson and atypical Parkinsonism. By contrast, metabolic imaging of the basal ganglia or thalamus network using 2,F-deoxyglucose may be helpful, showing a pattern of decreased activity in the globus pallidus interna with increased activity in the thalamus, the reverse of what is seen in Parkinson. Now we talk about secondary Parkinsonism. It occurs as a result of a variety of primary conditions, including drugs, stroke, tumor, infection, or exposure to toxins such as carbon monoxide or manganese that can cause damage to specific regions of the basal ganglia. The clinical features of secondary Parkinsonism will be, they reflect the region of the basal ganglia that has been damaged. Dopamine blocking agents such as neuroleptics are the most common cause of secondary Parkinsonism. Now here's a table which further tells us about the atypical and secondary Parkinsonism. Now we talk about the pathogenesis. So in the pathogenesis, there are different factors that can lead, starting with the age. The age itself is not likely to play a direct role in the degenerative process, but increased age is a risk factor definitely. For the environmental factors, the repeated injection of MPTP, that is 1-methyl-4-phenyl-1,2,3,6 tetrahydropyridine, causes Parkinson. Also, pesticides leads to oxidative and nitrative stress, which leads to greater risk of Parkinson. The excitotoxicity can be described as the substantia nigra compacta neurons, recessive extensive glutamate innervation from the cortex and the subthalamic nucleus. Dopamine lesion disinhibit the subthalamic and increases the firing rate of its excitatory output neurons. For the genetic disposition, there is mutation of PARK1, PARK2, and PARK5 gene. So all these factors will lead to mutation and deposition of alpha-synuclein, induction of Lewy bodies, and deposition of neuromelanin, which will further lead to microgliosis, mitochondrial dysfunction, inflammation, and generation of ROS. Now, this process will lead to two different things: the oxidative damage to DNA, lipids and proteins, and the loss of GSH, and also alteration in dopamine metabolism, redox, and axonal transport dysfunction. Now, these two processes will together lead to induction of apoptosis and onset of abnormal movement, which will cause the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. When we talk about the pathophysiology, destruction of dopaminergic neuronal cells in the substantia nigra in the basal ganglia, depletion of dopamine stores, then which will lead to degeneration of the dopaminergic nigrostriatal pathway. Then it will cause imbalance of excitatory and inhibiting neurotransmitter in the corpus striatum, which will further cause the impairment of extrapyramidal tracts controlling complex body movements and eventually leading to the cardinal features, which are tremors, rigidity, and bradykinesia. Now, when we talk about the signs and symptoms of Parkinson, there are three main symptoms which can be divided into primary, secondary, and non-motor symptoms. So for the primary motor symptoms, there are resting tremor, bradykinesia, rigidity, postural instability, which is balance problems, and walking gait problems. For the secondary motor symptoms, the main secondary motor symptoms are shuffling gait, which is rhythm of walking, micrographia, abnormally small or cramped handwriting, mask-like expression, and speech difficulties. There can be further secondary motor symptoms as well, which are listed as follows. For the non-motor symptoms, Parkinson experiences non-motor symptoms, those that do not involve movement, coordination, physical task, or mobility. There will be early symptoms, which will be loss of smell, constipation, REM behavior disorder or sleep disorder, mood disorder, orthostatic hypotension. There will be other non-motor symptoms, which will be loss of sense of smell, constipation, REM behavior disorder, mood disorders, orthostatic hypotension. Now, when we talk about the red flags of Parkinson's disease, there are mainly 10 red flags or early warning signs. They will be tremor, loss of smell, small handwriting, sleep problems, trouble moving, constipation, voice changes, mask face, dizziness, and also stooping. Now, this picture shows the stages of Parkinson's disease, starting with stage 1, which is develop mild symptoms, but able to go about day-to-day life. Stage 2, symptoms such as tremors and stiffness begin to worsen, may develop poor posture or have trouble walking. Stage 3, movement begins to slow down, loss of balance. Stage 4, symptoms are severe and cause significant issues with day-to-day living, unable to live alone and will need care. Stage 5, walking or standing may be impossible at this point. People at this stage are often confined to a wheelchair or bed. And now when we move on to treatment, so the first treatment will be levodopa. It is the most effective Parkinson's disease medication. Natural chemical that passes into brain and is converted into dopamine. Levodopa is combined with carbidopa, which protects levodopa from early conversion of dopamine outside brain. This prevents or lessens side effects such as nausea. Levodopa is given in combination with carbidopa in the ratio of 1:4, in which one part is for carbidopa and 4 portion is for levodopa. As the disease progresses, the benefits from levodopa may become less stable with a tendency to wax and wane wearing off, which is also known as the on and off phenomena. The off phenomena will be bradykinesia and on phenomena will be dyskinesia. Now, this table shows the side effects of levodopa, which will be loss of dopamine regulation, leading to substantial release of DA in pulsatile fashion, which will lead to motor fluctuations or dyskinesia. Now we move on to MAO inhibitors, which will be monoamine oxidase inhibitors. They include selegiline, rasagiline, and safinamide. They prevent the breakdown of brain dopamine by inhibiting the brain enzyme monoamine oxidase B, MAO-B. This enzyme metabolizes brain dopamine. Selegiline given with levodopa may help prevent wearing off. The side effects of this particular thing is the patient will have headaches, nausea, or insomnia. When added to carbidopa, levodopa, these medication increases the risk of hallucination. Now, COMT inhibitors, which is catechol O-methyl transferase inhibitors. The primary medication in this will be entacapone and opicapone. This medication mildly prolongs the effect of levodopa therapy by blocking an enzyme that breaks down dopamine. The side effects for this would be including an increased risk of involuntary movements, mainly result from an enhanced levodopa effect. Other side effects include diarrhea, nausea, or vomiting. We can also give anticholinergics to the patient. This is used for many years to help control the tremor associated with Parkinson's disease. Several anticholinergic medications are available, including benztropine or trihexyphenidyl. Anticholinergics were mainly used for tremors. Now we move on to amantadine, which is an antiviral medication. It provides short-term relief of symptoms of mild early-stage Parkinson's disease. May also be given with carbidopa, levodopa therapy during the later stages of Parkinson's disease to control involuntary movements induced by carbidopa, levodopa. Side effects may include a purple mottling of the skin, ankle swelling, or hallucination. There can be gene therapy as well, which will be dopamine synthesis, neutrophins, and Parkinson. We can also perform lesion surgeries. Early efforts focused on the sensory roots of spinal cord. Focus then shifted to motor cortex. Subcortical nuclei became areas of interest. Pallidotomy and thalamotomy. Pallidotomy, which is a procedure to destroy globus pallidus interna, and thalamotomy, which is a surgical procedure to treat tremors. Also, we can perform deep brain stimulation. In this process, an electrode is placed into the target area and connected to a stimulator, which is inserted subcutaneously over the chest wall. Now, this stimulates the effects of lesion without making a brain lesion. There can be non-pharmacologic as well, which could be physiotherapy for the patients, which will be, this is supplemental therapy. It helps with the movement, posture, and balance, relieve muscle and joint stiffness and discomfort, exercises to maintain or improve muscle strength. My main source was Harrison book. Thank you, doctors.
Any questions, comments? So I think we come to the Treasury presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. This is the Department Treasury presentation. The funds that are collected in total are 9,000 rupees, and these are the total funds we have collected. And the expenses done are the TAT presentation, various presentation comes out to be rupees 1,420 rupees. The departmental party was held last month, which came out to be, the expense was rupees 850 with a total of 2,270 rupees. The money left in the department fund as on today, that is 14th January, is 4,030 rupees. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? I think the interns had presented well. I'll just comment on the interns presentation. The topics were decided by themselves because they thought that the feedback they gave us was defense mechanism is frequently asked in MCQs. So they wanted to present them. I think both of them were very holistic and they had covered the presentation coherently, and also they tried to include most of the parts. Possibly they could have trimmed it because, you know, presentation, what you present and what you write, they can be little discordant in order to gather or sustain the attention of the audience. I think, but they learn with time. As an internship, they have done a very good job, and I think all the best to them for their future. Any questions audience have, or other we close the session?
I would just add to that. Yes, very good presentation by the interns. And one comment I have just regarding the first presentation, that is the certification. In that, I want to just tell that certificate is ultimately given by the CMO. So it is he who decides. Okay, whoever is the authority that gives a certificate, they have to decide on the opinion. So as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, sometimes a patient may come to you asking for a certificate for disability. We cannot give that. And also our opinion is not binding on them. So whoever is the authority, he will decide who's the psychologist or psychiatrist whose opinion he may take. So there may be a difference of opinion. So we should refrain from giving disability certificates, only give opinion when it is asked from the relevant authorities. That is all I have to add. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I would like to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.